Hi everybody, so today I'm going to show you how to cut up your duct tape dress form. Now, in a previous video I had showed using the peels of tangerines how to make different shapes so that you can make the bust lie flat. So if you haven't seen that video, I'm going to put it up on the left hand corner here, and when you're done and when you're ready, just come back here. So for this particular pattern, I'm actually going to be using the first method, which is just cutting up the bust into many very narrow pieces, because I think that is the simplest one to start with. So if you have made a dress form out of from your own body, you will have fairly large confidence that all your measurements are going to be the same. But in my case, where I couldn't wrap myself and I had to use another dress form, I'm actually just going to take the measurements of this at the bust, under bust, lower rib cage, waist, upper hips and lower hips, so that I know what the measurements are and what I need to decrease or increase in the measurements so that I know it will fit my body. Here's a list of the dress form's half measurements from which I got this duct tape pattern, and beside those I put my own half measurements. A half measurement is just the circumference of the body at each point, and then that's cut in half to make a pattern which will eventually be mirrored. Remember, if you're very asymmetric, you may have quite different measurements on each side of the body, and in that case you can use both halves of your duct tape pattern for one corset, so it won't be mirrored in this case. I drew the top and bottom edges and the waistline with marker so you can clearly see where I was measuring, and there would be no confusion as to whether to measure from the top or the bottom of the tape. In retrospect, I should have done this part before measuring all the different points, just to make it clearer, but I was concerned at the time that the marker lines wouldn't show up well on camera, so you wouldn't see my reference lines without the tape. So like I showed previously, when I measure it across the waist here, it ends up being 13 inches for the half waist, which means that the total waist circumference for this corset is going to be 26 inches, but I want to alter it so that it's going to be 24 inches instead. I'm not going to cut it off either the center front or the center back, because those need to stay straight. The reason for that is because the front is going to hold the bust and the back is going to hold the grommet, so you don't want any bowing in either of those areas. So when I divide this pattern into a number of pieces, I'm going to have to shave off a little bit of those pieces on the inside here. So I'll show you how to do that. Here I'm marking out the divisions on the waistline and then numbering each future panel right away so there's no confusion. Since I'm going to divide the bust into several pieces, I'm making the panels in the front more narrow than the ones closer to the back. In total, I ended up with 7 pattern pieces. This is arbitrary and depends on how many pieces you want and also your bust size and desired shape. Next, I'm cutting off the extra stuff above and below my edge lines, since I'm done with all my measurements and I don't need it anymore. Now you can see the eventual shape of the corset more clearly. Marking out the divisions on the bust is once again a little bit technique and a little bit intuition. Manipulate the form in your hand and try to determine the width of each panel piece based on how well it squishes flat and how much fullness is distributed. Don't worry if you make a mistake. Later on, when you make a flat pattern of this onto paper, you can take off some of one pattern and add it somewhere else. A little give and take is allowed and can be tested later on in your mock-ups. So here's a close-up of how I divided the bust in this pattern. You'll see that I distributed the fullness between 4 different panels. So here's the first panel. You'll see that it's straight on the center front, and then I took some of the fullness here and blended it down into this curve, and then just tried to make as straight as line as possible down into the waist. The second one here, you'll see that I put a division between the panels right up to this point here. So this helps me prevent having any really strange geometrically shaped pattern pieces, and it helps me to really define that point when I'm assembling this later on. And then I once again took some of the fullness and blended it down into the waist. So I just tapered it off here. The third one here, I took a little bit more of the fullness, and you'll see here when I cut it out it will be slightly curved and taper down into the waist. And then the fourth one here, you'll see that I'm getting into the flatter side of this pattern piece now. So this side is more or less straight down, but this one has a curve to it. So it will look sort of like a drop when I'm done cutting it out. So let me show you that. Alright, so here are all my different pattern pieces lined up, and you can see the majority of them lay pretty flat. The only ones that spring up a little bit are panel 2 and panel 3, just around the bust here. You might find that happens to you as well. Don't panic if that happens. If you remember the video where I was cutting out the tangerine peels, you'll notice that it was naturally formed around a curve. So even if I cut them into many different pieces, they still had a little bit of spring to it. You had to push them flat so that they would be able to lie flat. So when you're tracing this over to some type of paper or Bristol board, that's just what you're going to have to do. Push it as flat as possible and then trace it around. And when you're making your mock-up out of this, and you should make a mock-up out of this, I know that many of you would think that this will fit you perfectly because it was draped from you, but you should still make a mock-up because fabric behaves differently to tape. But when you make a mock-up, you'll find that the bust should actually fit you fairly well, even though it came from a flattened out pattern instead of this curve right here, because fabric is able to drape over. Now let's say that you want to make the waist smaller here. Let's say that you had made your duct tape form from yourself, but you weren't wearing a corset underneath. It had your natural waist, and now you want to make the waist a little bit smaller. So in this situation, it's 13 inches across one side, so that's 26-inch waist on this pattern, and I want to make it a 24-inch waist. So I want to bring this line, this waistline, from 13 inches to 12 inches. What you want to do is, once again, don't shave down the center front or the center back. Those have to remain straight. The other sides of each panel piece is fair game. So let's count how many sides there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So you have 12 different panel pieces to choose from to shave off that 1 extra inch. So what you may choose to do is shave off 1/12 of an inch off each one of these panels. Is going to be extremely small. This is why pattern making, especially for corsets, has to be extremely precise. Another thing that you can do to make this a little bit easier is to shave off that extra inch just on the panels that you think is going to be most important. For instance, most people don't care if you have any waist reduction in the back area. So let's take it off of, say, mostly the front and the side areas. So for instance, panels 2 through 5, it has 8 sides to it. See, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So in this situation, you would shave off 1/8 of an inch off of each side of these panels for a total of 1/4 inch off each of panels 2 through 5. Still extremely small measurements, but it's a lot easier to deal with 1/4 inch off each panel instead of 1/12 of an inch shaved off every side. The last method that you can use involves a little bit more math. It involves taking the percentage of the waist measurement of each panel compared to the total waist measurement and then reducing it accordingly. There's a tutorial on Foundations Revealed that's free that teaches you how to do this. But just as an overview, for instance, this first panel here is 1.5 inches versus this last panel here, which is 2.5 inches. So based on percentage, you're going to be taking off more on panel 7 than you are going to be taking off of panel 1, just based on the fact that this was larger to begin with. So if you want to do it that way, you can certainly try it. I'll put the link down in the description. So later on, if anybody is interested, I can show you how this pattern looks when all the pieces are transferred over to Bristol board and have its measurements modified to fit my figure. And then after that, it's pretty much mock-up time. So thanks for joining me. Let me know if you want to see those other videos, and I will see you all next time. Bye.